Look at this bottleneck. This is what happens when you try to process emails, messages, and a complex project all at once. The data streams collide, back up, and the system chokes. For decades, cognitive science treated this crash as an unavoidable biological truth. Human beings cannot multitask. The limitation comes down to a single piece of hardware behind your forehead, the prefrontal cortex. Here in this 3D network model, the prefrontal cortex is the bright node at the front. It is the brain's executive control center, responsible for conscious thought, attention, and regulating your behavior. Every complex decision you make routes right here. But when two distinct data streams try to enter that node simultaneously, the architecture fails. The prefrontal cortex can strictly process only one conscious task at a time. It forces one stream to halt completely while it clears the other. Because of this hard physical limit, what we perceive as multitasking is an illusion. We aren't doing two things at once. We are rapidly switching our attention back and forth between isolated tasks. This constant switching exacts a heavy toll. Every time the brain stops and restarts a task, it generates cognitive lag, slowing down your overall processing speed and dramatically increasing your error rate. Standard anatomical models have been clear on this point. Performing two cognitively demanding tasks at the exact same moment is biologically impossible. That consensus held until June 2026, when researchers at Georgetown University Medical Center published a study in the Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience. Their findings dismantled the mental bottleneck assumption. The data revealed that humans can achieve true parallel multitasking. We can process two distinct tasks at the exact same time without dropping performance. The researchers discovered that achieving this remarkable capacity requires the human brain to physically and structurally remodel its own internal anatomy. To do two things at once, the brain physically rewires itself to cut your conscious, thinking mind entirely out of the behavioral loop. Extended practice physically alters the brain's hardware, permanently changing its architecture. To understand how cognitive science missed this phenomenon for so long, we have to look at how learning research is typically conducted. Historically, studies on skill acquisition mapped the early stages of learning. A participant would practice a task, researchers would monitor the initial adaptation, and the study would conclude, usually after just a few hours. The Georgetown team abandoned that short-term window. They wanted to track what happens to neural pathways when practice extends over a period of weeks. As shown in this interface mockup, participants used a mobile app to analyze morphed images of cars. They had to visually process the amalgamation and sort it into one of two distinct categories. The researchers weren't interested in the first few dozen attempts. They pushed participants through an immense volume of data, requiring them to complete more than 30,000 individual sorting trials. This intense daily repetition continued unbroken for 5 to 10 weeks. To track the structural changes, the researchers mapped the participants' brains using functional MRI and EEG technology before the training began. Once the 10-week period concluded, they performed the exact same scans, allowing them to map how the physical routing of information had changed. By pushing the brain past initial skill acquisition and into extreme repetition, the researchers observed a distinct phase of neuroplasticity reserved for automation. This fMRI scan represents stage 1 of the experiment. Notice the bright heat map localized exclusively in the frontal lobe. During the early trials, the sorting task required intense, conscious focus. Every decision routed to the prefrontal cortex bottleneck, consuming executive bandwidth. But in the post-training scan, after weeks of repetition, the frontal lobe goes completely dark. A new heat map flares to life in the lower middle section, the temporal lobe. The cognitive load of the sorting task physically shifted entirely out of the executive center and relocated to the temporal cortex. The researchers identified this new neural structure as a category-selective area. This localized neuron cluster is dedicated specifically to processing complex object recognition without conscious input. Because of this, incoming visual data bypasses the prefrontal bottleneck entirely, routing directly to the new temporal node and out to a motor pathway. With the sorting task executing subconsciously in the temporal cortex, the prefrontal cortex is left completely blank. It is now fully available to process a second, highly complex task. This physical neural bypass is what enables true multitasking, routing information around the bottleneck instead of trying to force it through. The Georgetown study reveals a universal principle of neural offloading. The brain can migrate complex information processing from conscious regions to specialized subconscious ones. This offloading process is mirrored in a parallel neural system responsible for physical habits, the basal ganglia. Together, the temporal cortex and the basal ganglia act as dual subconscious processors, systematically removing repetitive work from the thinking brain. As an action is repeated, control shifts. The conscious prefrontal cortex relinquishes command, handing the behavior over to the primitive, automated circuits of the basal ganglia. This is the exact mechanism that allows experienced drivers to navigate heavy traffic while holding a deep conversation, or elite radiologists to spot microscopic abnormalities on an X-ray without actively searching for them. Once a complex behavior is fully stored in the basal ganglia, it runs automatically. It requires almost zero cognitive energy to execute. Shifting tasks from conscious effort to subconscious automation is the brain's ultimate survival mechanism for maximizing efficiency. But that efficiency comes at the direct cost of executive control. This neural offloading has a significant drawback. The mechanism that enables elite multitasking is the same system that makes bad habits difficult to break. Look at this circuit diagram. Once a compulsive behavior, like checking your phone or stress eating, is offloaded to the basal ganglia, the prefrontal cortex loses all direct control over it. The willpower node fires, but there is no physical connection to the subconscious loop. These automated subconscious circuits are blind to logic. They do not respond to reasoning, and they do not care about your conscious decisions. The basal ganglia operates on a different language entirely. It responds only to established patterns, to environmental triggers, and immediate visual or emotional cues. This disconnect is why simply deciding to stop a bad habit often fails. The conscious desire to stop doesn't reach the mechanism executing the action. This mirrors the Georgetown findings. Once a behavior moves to these specialized circuits, the part of the brain that decides to quit is no longer the part running the behavioral code. Structural shifts in the brain's architecture create behaviors that function independently of the conscious mind. Cognitive awareness of a problem is entirely insufficient to fix a physically rewired brain. Knowing you have a bad habit does nothing to dismantle the neural pathway. To regain control, you have to starve the automated system. You must manipulate your external environment to remove the specific cues and triggers that activate the basal ganglia circuits. Second, you must intentionally engage your prefrontal cortex to forge entirely new neural shortcuts. This requires the deliberate, extreme repetition of a replacement behavior until a new structural path is built. The prefrontal cortex is a tool built exclusively for learning. As you see this spark burning a new permanent path, remember that your conscious mind is meant to carve the root, not carry the daily load. To master true multitasking or break a subconscious habit, you must stop forcing everything through the narrow bottleneck of your conscious mind. Instead, you have to focus on training your subconscious to do the heavy lifting for you.